I've talked before about how I've been involved in sports and how I've coached track for a lot of years now. I started out, track was actually the first thing I ever lettered in high school. I was a 3-year letterman in high school. Our high school only had 3 grades, so freshmen were still in junior high back in the day when we did things. I'm not saying that to say I would have been a 4-year letterman, because I don't think that would have happened. But in being in track and field and being able to participate, by the time I reached my senior year, I'd had the experience of standing up on the winner's podium, going to an invitational and even being able to stand on top, or to stand at second and third of that, going to districts. And at districts, I was inches away from being able to go to state. I took 3rd place, and so I got to stand, and there were 2 others ahead of me on the podium. And through the years as an assistant coach, I've had athletes that I've coached who have been the champions, have stood on that podium, and everywhere down the line, from first to 8th place. And I'll tell you, all the people who were down the podium and all the people who were watching the thing that were athletes who participated, they were all thinking the same thing when they saw that guy standing on top or that gal standing on top, and the coach puts the ribbon and the medal over their head, and that is, I wish I was that person. I wish I was on the top spot. I wish that I could be up there. In fact, some years back I was coaching and we were at the district meet, and one of my athletes didn't perform the way that they had wanted to. And they were really disgusted with themselves, but they were embarrassed. They were picked to be in the top 2 in their race, and they finished like 6th. And so when the time came to hand out the medals and they had everybody on the podium and they called their name to go up in 6th, they were nowhere around, they weren't there. And so I went looking for them, and they finished handing out the stuff, and they were back in the tent. And I said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to go up and get your medal." And they were saying, "Oh, I couldn't do that. It was embarrassing. It was just embarrassing, the display that I put on. I didn't do near as well as I should have." And something inside of me just kind of snapped. And I went after him, and I said, "I don't want ever hear you talk that way again. And the next time your name is called, you march up there and you stand proud and you own what you've done. And you realize that there are 100 other athletes that are here that would love to have been able to stand on the podium in your spot. And you've just disrespected, what we're doing here and what it's about." And so they were sufficiently chastised, head hanging. And so I think about that, and I think, yes, we want to be in those spots when we're in sports. That's kind of the idea, is the competition. And as a coach, as coaches, there's a little speech that we often get. I heard it in high school. I heard it in college. My coaches gave me this speech. I've used it several times. It goes something like this. What is it that you want to achieve this season? Do you want to win? You've got the team in front of you, your athlete in front of you. Do you want to be a league champion? Do you want to be a state champion? Then what are you willing to do to get there? Are you willing to pay the price? Have you evaluated the cost of that achievement? Do you truly have the desire that it will take to make it happen? And assuming the answer is yes, which it almost always is, the coach, because no one's going to say, "No, coach, I'm just happy to be mediocre." The coach and the athlete then map out what it's going to take, a practice plan in order to get where they want to go. So this morning, as we near the end of our sermon series, The Jesus Way, we've just got a few more Sundays of that, we find that there are 2 disciples of Jesus who want to stand on the podium in God's kingdom. All right? They want places on the right and left. They realize that the top spot's already taken, and so they want to be on those spots on the podium. They want to be right and left, 2nd and 3rd place. That's what they want. And they have an interesting way then of making this happen. They hatch this little plan, and we're going to take a look at it. But before we do that, before we launch into our scripture today, I want to give us a little run at it, and back up a little bit, because there's a lot of context for this. There's a lot that comes before that kind of sets up how we're going to feel about what these 2 guys do. And so as we back up, remember last Sunday, Jesus had his encounter. If you were here with us, Jesus had this encounter with a rich young ruler who walked away sad because Jesus had asked him to choose between his wealth and Jesus. And he chose his wealth. And it was a close thing. I mean, we get that in the picture, and he walked away sad. And not only did he walk away sad, but Jesus stood there sad. And it's all kind of interesting because Jesus didn't chase after him and say, oh, no, just give part of it away. Or I was just kidding. Or you'll figure it out. Jesus let him walk. And then Jesus said this at the end of he finishes with this discussion on wealth with his disciples, and he says that many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. And I wonder if that just fell on deaf ears with his followers. I wonder what they were thinking, or if they were scratching their heads saying, what's he talking about now? Because I think that happened a lot with them at different points along the way. On the heels of that, Jesus tells the parable of the workers in the vineyard to kind of illustrate this idea of the first and the last. And if you want, you can look at that. But the synopsis of that is that all these workers are hired by this farmer through the day to go out and work in his fields. And he hires one in the morning, one at noon, one near the evening, one an hour before it was supposed to be done. And when they line up to pay them all, he pays them all exactly the same amount. And some of them begin to complain who started in the morning. He said, we've worked all day and we get the same amount as those guys. And so Jesus was trying to make a point not about economics, but a point about getting into the kingdom. Because being a part of the kingdom is why he came. He's brought the kingdom. And there are some who will serve all their lives for the kingdom, and there's some who get in at the last minute. But all of them are going to be able to enjoy the fruit of being in the kingdom. Then Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to make one last trip to Jerusalem. And he tells them flat out, it's kind of interesting because he's been hinting as he goes along and saying different things, but he tells them flat out, when I get to Jerusalem, I'm going to be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. And they're going to condemn me to death. And they're going to turn me over to the Gentiles, which Gentiles is anybody who's not a Jew. They're going to turn me over basically to the Romans, because those were the dominant Gentile group. And I'll be mocked and flogged and crucified. Now, I'm sure that must have got the disciples' attention at that point, because to be crucified was the most terrible way to die. And to think that their Lord and Master was talking this way, they thought, well, he must be talking symbolically. He must be talking about some weird thing. Maybe this has something to do with the first, last, and the last first. Oh, that's a thought. But at any rate, I don't know that they completely got it. And then he says, and on the third day, I will rise from the dead. He says it plainly to them. And this is then the run-up to today's passage in Matthew 20. So let's read what Matthew tells us. He starts out with the word then, which tells you that Jesus has just told them that he's going to be crucified, and then he's going to rise from the dead. And we read, then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, what do you wish? And she said to him, grant that these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your kingdom. But Jesus answered and said, you do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink and be immersed with the immersion that I am immersed with? They said to him, we are able. So he said to them, you will indeed drink my cup and be immersed with the immersion that I am immersed with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father in heaven. And when the 10 heard it, okay, the other 10 disciples, when they heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. Some of your translations say they were indignant. It's kind of an interesting word. I think we've lost the meaning of certain words. They were mad, okay? They were upset by what had been done, what the other two had done. But Jesus called them to himself, and he said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man, that's what Jesus called himself, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So again, we have this situation that has occurred. We have these 12 disciples, and they're struggling themselves to figure out the Jesus way. They're struggling themselves to figure out what is it that we're really supposed to be and do. They have in their minds already what they think things are going to be like. Their minds are clouded by this presupposition that the Messiah is going to be an earthly king who's going to set up Israel to be great like it once was under their ancestor David and his son Solomon. And it's going to be awesome. They're going to kick out the Romans, and we're going to have a rightful place in the world. And that then touched their lives and got wrapped into their own selfish desires. And so we have this request from the mother of James and John, two of Jesus' disciples, the sons of Zebedee, that was her husband. And it's completely out of place with what Jesus had been desperately trying to teach them. So let's look a little deeper at this passage. It starts with a bold request. The mother of Zebedee's sons, whose names are James and John, as I said, she gets on her knees before Jesus. It's kind of interesting. You know, she doesn't come up and say, hey, can I talk to you or whatever. She comes and falls to her knees right in front of him. And he knows then in that moment, okay, she wants something. She's showing honor. She's showing respect. And Jesus asks, what do you wish? Or what do you want? He gathers from her approach that she wants something, and the gospel writer Mark also records this event. In fact, when Mark records this event, he doesn't even mention the mom. He just says that James and John came and asked Jesus for what they wanted. So it's kind of interesting that what we get from this and what scholars believe in the field we have is that the three of them hatched this plan together. And that maybe James and John might have been even the ones who started the whole idea, put their mother up to it. Oh, he likes you. This might be good. It'll carry more weight if you speak for us. I remember once years ago in a church in the Portland area, there was a youth pastor who was hired, and he only lasted about 3 months. And I was talking to one of the elders from their church that I knew, and I said, man, that's short even for a youth pastor. Anyway, and I said, what was the deal with that? And he goes, wow, he just wasn't right for the job at all. And I said, well, what kind of recommendations did you get? And he goes, well, we just had one. We got a recommendation from his mom. And I said, and you didn't think to ask any more questions beyond that? So, but here's these guys, they get mom, and they say, okay, this is going to be it. And for her part, there was a group of women who traveled with Jesus and his disciples at times providing for their needs. They would do cleaning and cooking and washing and things like that. They would also provide financially sometimes, we're told in Scripture, for Jesus and his disciples as they would go different places. And James and John's mom was one of these women. So she would have had a close, ongoing relationship with Jesus. There are some who even surmise from certain biblical evidence that she was actually Jesus' aunt, which is kind of interesting. If you want to talk to me about that sometime, it's kind of a new thing that I hadn't even really thought of before, but they can make a case for the fact if that were true, James and John would have been Jesus' first cousins. So it's just interesting how things might have been. We don't know for sure. But I was thinking about her, before we critique her too hard, at least she believes that Jesus is going to be king. At least she believes that he is the Messiah with her own kind of messed up way of looking at that. She believes that his kingdom is imminent. She believes him when he says, the kingdom is among you, or the kingdom has come. So we got to give her credit for that, right? She's just messed up along with her two boys on what that's going to look like. And so I think about that and I think, okay, Jesus has just got through saying, I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to be beaten. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be killed. And then in 3 days, I'll rise from the dead. You hear that message, and then on the heels of that, you say, oh, by the way, when you set up your kingdom, can we sit on the right and left? So inappropriate and strange. And add to that, back in chapter 19, Jesus had just told the disciples this. He says, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, so he's talking the end of time, you who followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. They already knew, they had already been told. I'm sure they all thought, well, yeah, we're going to be, on thrones. We're going to be, we're going to have place. I knew I was in this for the right reason. I'm sure they were all thinking that way. And yet, that's not good enough for James and John. It's not good enough to be one of 12 thrones that are sitting there. Where do they want to be? Right and left. Top dogs. They want to be higher up the podium. And again, Jesus is number one, so, we're going to be on either side of him. So she asks for places for her boys. She wants them in those places, and the request seems, to be a tough thing, but we find out that there's more to it. Jesus gives them an answer, and it's a challenging answer. Jesus tells them, mom and sons, that they don't know what they're asking for. And then he says something that I'm sure was somewhat confusing to them. He says, are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink? And are you able to be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to receive? Now, I translated that for you. The word baptize means to immerse. It's a Greek word that really ought to be translated in all of our Bibles as the word immerse. And so when we put it in that context, especially here, he says, and are you able to be immersed in the things that I'm going to be immersed in? And what he's talking about is what he just told them. We're going to Jerusalem. They're going to beat me. They're going to scourge me, whip me with a cat of nine tails. They're going to crucify me on the cross and kill me. Are you able to go through that? That's what he's saying. In fact, we know that because later in the garden, Jesus is going to pray to the Father, if there's any way, take this cup from me. He refers to this thing that he's going through as the cup that he must drink. But even deeper than that, when he uses this term immersion, it's going to be all-encompassing. There's going to be nothing else on your mind because of the intensity of this. And we know that they didn't get it because really quickly they say, oh, sure, we're able. Yeah, we can do it. And I just picture Jesus shaking his head and thinking, you have no idea, what I'm talking about or what this is that you're going to go through. Then Jesus goes on and tells them this, and it should have stopped them in their tracks. He says, in fact, you will experience these things. You will experience them. And they don't get it. They don't get it. James and John, James was the first of the disciples to be martyred, to be killed. We have it recorded in Acts 12, 1 and 2. It was about this time, this is after Jesus had ascended and the early churches started, about this time King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. The very thing Jesus said came about. And John's kind of an interesting character because John, of all the disciples, church tradition says he's the only one who lived to old age. But even he was persecuted. Even he was arrested. Even he was beaten. And he was exiled to the island of Patmos. And so he very much was immersed in what Jesus was talking about. Each of them did drink the cup that Jesus was talking about here. Then Jesus disappoints them further by telling them that these places on the right and left are not his to give. I'm sure they thought, you could have just told us that in the first place, and go into all this other stuff, but he says, yeah, they're not for me. The Heavenly Father has already prepared them for someone. So they're not mine to give. Then Jesus once again tries to teach them what he wants them to understand, and that is a new paradigm. Now, I've talked about paradigms before. It's another big word. So what is a paradigm? And don't tell me 20 cents, okay? I get it? 2 dimes. Okay, I'm just checking. A paradigm is a new way of looking at things. A paradigm is a new way. A paradigm means that my whole world has suddenly been changed because of something that I understand. When I was in my master's program, there was a guy in our cohort, which was about 25 of us in the cohort, and we'd be in a lecture in one of my theology classes or something, and the professor would say something, and then he would just blurt out, "Oh man, that's a whole new paradigm for me." And then a little while, a couple days go by, and he'd go, "Oh wow, what a new paradigm." And then, next week, "Oh man, that's a crazy new paradigm." And he kept doing that. And one of the other students leaned over to me and said, "I don't think he knows what that word means." But it's this idea that maybe it was just rocking his world, whatever the professor was saying. But it's this idea that we have to completely turn upside down what we were thinking. There's a whole new world view. And so Jesus is trying to help his disciples understand this. Matthew tells us that when the other disciples heard about James and John's request, they were indignant. They were angry, probably because they hadn't thought of it themselves. But certainly because they were worried that somehow their position in the hierarchy was in jeopardy because James and John would get to the top spots ahead of them and they're further down the podium. And so they didn't like that. At this point, again, I picture Jesus giving a big sigh. He sees them all quibbling with each other, and he calls them all over together, sets them down, and one more time he begins to explain. Let's hear what he says again. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever wants to become great among you, let that person be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So the new paradigm is one of service, of giving to others rather than selfishness and power for myself. The Gentiles who don't know God, they don't know how he has set things up. He don't know how he wants them to live. They lord it over everyone else. They fight for positions of power. Those who don't understand what God is about, and unfortunately for even us as Christians, because we get tempted that way, we get caught up in the world's view of I got to get mine, or I got to be the one in charge, or I got to have power, or I got to be there. And it's this selfishness that can overwhelm us. And Jesus is saying, that's not the way my kingdom works. It's not a kingdom of power and authority in that way. God rewards serving others rather than serving ourselves. God lifts up those who humble themselves rather than those who exalt themselves. Jesus tells them that they should follow his example, that he came to be served. He came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You think about this, if they even thought about it, he's the Son of God. We know that, and intellectually we think about that, but he is the Son of God. He was present at the creation of the world, right? For me to even begin to fathom that he would become one of us, that we would become a human being. And then when he came, and we talk about it all the time. We celebrate how, at Christmas time, he was born in a manger to poor people in a backwater village and all these things, rather than being born in the palace, to the kings and being recognized from the beginning of who he's going to be. He came to be a servant. He came to be the humble lowest of the low. And it's how he lived his life, different from even the religious leaders of their time, who themselves were searching for power and expecting others to serve them because they were so godly. They were doing it right. And so he calls them out. He says, the idea isn't to be mad at them because they somehow have more power than me. The idea is that I'm going to serve. I'm not even going to pursue that. I'm going to put others first. It's why when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Well, the greatest is to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength, he said. But he adds a second one. And to love your neighbor as yourself. To love others. It's in loving others that we show how much God is worth to us. It's in loving others and hearing about those commandments that we understand suddenly there is a new paradigm. There is a new way of looking at the world, and it doesn't involve my selfishness, but it involves me being a servant. Even, Jesus says, being a slave. And so that's the call he places upon us. So where do we land with this story from Jesus' life? What is it that Jesus wants us to understand in walking in the Jesus way? 3 quick things. Ask these questions. What do you want? I'm not talking about lunch. But to think in your life, because usually another way of saying it is, what am I pursuing? What is it that I'm after? What do you want? It's a question that Jesus asked James and John's mom, what do you want? She wanted positions of prestige and power for her sons, and they wanted that too. And that's the lure of the world, to fight your way to the top, to be the one calling the shots, to be the one that's in control. But Jesus says that our desire should be to serve others. The Apostle Paul kept reiterating this with the churches, because the churches in the early years, the first century, kept falling into this thing of trying to be in control, or say this one's, even things like saying, well, I follow this guy, so we're better than you, or I follow this guy, and we're better than you. And it all revolved around power. And so he said this in Philippians 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. How would it change our world if every Christian did that? How would it change our lives if we took seriously what Paul is saying here? What do you want? Do you want to be a servant? Do you want to see others do well? Is your life about looking to the interests of others? Then a second question, what will it cost? What will it cost? Well, it's going to cost me my pride. It's going to cost me my comfort. And I don't like being uncomfortable. I can tell you right now, I don't. But I have to ask the question, it's not like I'm going to go out and, I'm going to go sit on a briar bush just because it's uncomfortable. No, it's I'm willing to go through discomfort if it's going to help you. Even so far, if we listen to Jesus and take him seriously, I will do that for people who don't like me, my enemies, or at least those that consider themselves my enemy. Sacrificing on behalf of others. In fact, the very nature of sacrifice is that it costs us something. It will cost us our lives. Maybe not in terms of physically dying, although some have, but in terms of every day in a million different little ways as we serve others. Last question, who is it for? Well, it's not for me. First and foremost, it's for God. If you say you believe in God, if you say that Jesus is your Lord, then you do everything for him. Every single little thing is for him. That's why Jesus said that the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's the greatest one. Everything we do is for him. And we show our love for him by loving others and serving them. And as I said before, when I was on the track team in high school, I had my opportunities to be on the podium and receive awards because I beat out other competitors. And I thought, oh, this is awesome. This is what I need to be. But when you start focusing on that, you begin to lose sight of things. I had a kid in my youth group years ago, and I think I've shared once before about him, but he was on the track team in middle school, and he and another kid, both in our youth group, and he was one of those just incredible athletes. He matured fast, and so he just wiped people out. He would run the 800, and he would just smoke people. I mean, he'd come across the finish line, and the rest of the runners are coming around the last corner. I mean, that's how far ahead he'd be. And I remember one race I was watching him, and his friend Kevin, who was on the team, was the worst at that race. Terrible. He couldn't find anything that he could do well on the team, but he was out because they were friends and he liked to be with the group. And so as they had this one race, I watched him run the 800, and Neil, he finishes ahead of everybody. They're just coming out of the corner, and Kevin is still in the backstretch going. And as he finished the race, which this is illegal to do in high school, but we got away with it in middle school, he finished the race and ran across the field and then ran beside his friend Kevin, encouraging him all the way to the end. See, it wasn't a big deal to him. I mean, he gave it the weight that it was due, but he was more concerned about his friend. He wanted to see his friend do well. He wanted to encourage his friend. He wanted to be a servant to Kevin. And it just lifted Kevin to get PRs, to improve each race and to do better. And that's the kind of thing that God is calling us to. Yes, there's things we're going to be able maybe to do well, and people say, oh, you're so good at this, or you're good at that, or whatever. That should be like water off a duck's back. Or at least we should say, hey, it's all the Lord. It's all for him. But wouldn't it be better to have someone come and say, man, I like the way you serve. I saw what you did over there. And I'm so glad that you were willing to help or willing to serve. On that day, one day when we get to heaven, and God is going to be there, what are we going to want him to say? Oh, you did all this or you did all that sort of thing. Or do you want him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in the little things, in the little service of others. Come and enter into the joy of your Lord. And that's what I want to hear him say. Remember Peter's words in 1 Peter 5. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Let's bow together in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, this is a lesson that many of us maybe have thought, yeah, I've heard that 100 times. And yet I still need to hear it, Lord. I know that we all do. I still need to put it in place until it truly becomes a paradigm, a turning over of my entire life to be your servant, serving you by serving others. And so, Father, I pray that you would touch each of our hearts by your Spirit. Convict us where we need to be convicted, Lord. Challenge us where we need to be challenged, to be servants, to not worry about power. In fact, to put that aside in terms of a concern, Lord, but rather just to serve like Jesus served. And we pray all this in his mighty name. Amen.